The Galactic Science Institute's pristine white halls had never seen anything quite like Dr. Sarah Chen. While other researchers glided through the corridors in their formal attire and neural enhancement halos, she strode in wearing Earth-standard work clothes and carrying an ancient leather messenger bag that had seen better days. The bag's most prominent feature was a worn coffee stain that refused to fade despite her best efforts. The Institute's head of theoretical physics, Director Anxvel, observed her approach through compound eyes that shifted through shades of violet, a sign of intense curiosity among the Arthan species. His crystalline exoskeleton caught the light as he moved to greet her, towering nearly 9 feet tall. "Dr. Chen," he clicked, mandibles working to form the human sounds. "Your arrival is unexpected." Sarah smiled, adjusting the strap of her bag. The transport was faster than projected. Humans tend to find ways to improve efficiency. Anxvel's antenna twitched, a gesture that could indicate either amusement or concern. In this case, probably both. "Yes, we've noticed this tendency, though your species' methods are often unconventional." "Unconventional gets results," Sarah replied, following the director as he led her through a series of increasingly secure checkpoints. Each scanner they passed hummed with confusion at her lack of neural enhancements or quantum processors, standard equipment for most galactic scientists. They arrived at a vast chamber filled with holographic displays showing mathematical equations that seemed to dance in the air. Other researchers, representing a dozen different species, worked at various stations. Each was connected to the central computing network through their neural interfaces. Sarah noticed how they paused their work to watch her pass, their enhanced eyes scanning her with poorly concealed skepticism. "Your application to join the Institute's quantum mechanics division was intriguing," Anxvel said, leading her to a private consultation room. "Your theories on wave-particle duality at the cosmic scale are either brilliant or completely incorrect. We cannot determine which." "That's usually a good sign," Sarah said, setting her bag down and pulling out a notebook. Actual paper, bound with metal spirals. Several nearby researchers visibly recoiled at the sight of such primitive technology. Anxvel's exoskeleton shifted to a deeper shade of blue, indicating either deep thought or indigestion. Sarah wasn't quite sure which. "Before we can consider your application, you must complete our standard evaluation. Most candidates require approximately 3 months to." 3 months. Sarah interrupted, already flipping open her notebook. "What's the problem set?" The director's mandibles clicked rapidly, the Arthan equivalent of a surprised cough. "Dr. Chen, this isn't a simple entrance exam. We're talking about solving quantum-scale problems that even our most advanced AI systems struggle with. The evaluation is designed to show you how I think," Sarah finished. "That's exactly what I want. Show me the problem." Anxvel hesitated, then activated the room's holographic display. A series of equations materialized in the air, each one more complex than the last. They described a theoretical scenario involving quantum entanglement at a galactic scale, a problem that had stumped the scientific community for decades. "The challenge," Anxvel explained, "is to determine whether consciousness-driven quantum observation can influence entangled particles across intergalactic distances, accounting for temporal spatial distortion and." He stopped as Sarah began writing in her notebook, her hand moving with quick, decisive strokes. She wasn't using any of the standard computational methods. Instead, she was drawing what appeared to be diagrams, simple sketches. Anxvel's confusion deepened as she began mumbling to herself. "If we consider consciousness as a wave function, but that's not quite right, is it? More like a field effect. Yes, that works better." She flipped to a new page, her pencil practically dancing across the paper. "Dr. Chen," Anxvel interrupted, "perhaps I should explain the approved methodological approach." "Got it," Sarah said, looking up from her notebook. "The answer is yes, but not in the way you're thinking. You're approaching it backward." The room fell silent. Through the transparent walls, Sarah could see that nearby researchers had stopped their work to watch. HFY's exoskeleton had shifted to a pale yellow, a color she hadn't seen before. "That's not possible," he said. "You've been here for less than 15 minutes. Sarah turned her notebook around, showing a series of surprisingly simple diagrams and equations. "Look, the problem isn't with the math. Your equations are perfect. The problem is with the underlying assumptions. You're treating consciousness as a localized phenomenon, but it's more like a quantum field itself. Once you realize that, the solution practically writes itself." HFY's compound eyes focused on the notebook, scanning the hand-drawn diagrams with increasing agitation. But this completely contradicts the unified theory of conscious observation. The equations clearly show. The equations show what you expect them to show. Sarah interrupted gently. "That's the problem with having perfect computational systems. Sometimes they're so perfect, they miss the obvious. Humans are messy thinkers. We make logical leaps. Sometimes we're wrong, but sometimes—" She tapped her notebook. "Sometimes we see things that perfect systems miss." The director's coloring shifted rapidly through several shades as he processed this. Around them, the other researchers had abandoned any pretense of working, their enhanced senses focused entirely on the impossible scene unfolding in the consultation room. "This will need to be verified," HFY finally said. "The implications, if you're correct." "I am," Sarah said, already turning to a fresh page in her notebook. "But I understand the need for verification. While your systems are checking my work, should we move on to the next problem? I've got a few ideas about dark matter I've been wanting to run by someone." HFY stared at her for a long moment, his antennae weaving complex patterns in the air. Finally, he said something that no human had ever heard within the halls of the Galactic Science Institute. Perhaps we are the ones who need to learn from you." Sarah smiled, tapping her pencil against her notebook. "That's why I'm here, Director. Not to prove humans are better, but to show that different ways of thinking can lead to the same truth. Sometimes you need a quantum computer." She held up her simple pencil. "And sometimes you just need to look at things from a new angle." Outside the consultation room, the news was already spreading through neural networks and quantum channels. A human, using nothing but graphite and processed wood pulp, had solved an equation that had stumped the galaxy's finest minds for decades. And she had done it in less time than it took most species to calibrate their neural interfaces. The age of perfect, predictable science was over. The era of human intuition had begun. The news of Sarah Chen's unorthodox solution spread through the Galactic Science Institute like a quantum wave collapse. Within hours, every neural network buzzed with debate, and every quantum-linked consciousness struggled to process the implications. In the Institute's grand auditorium, hundreds of the galaxy's leading scientists gathered for an emergency session. Sarah sat in the front row, still clutching her paper notebook, while Director HFY addressed the assembled minds. The audience was a testament to galactic diversity. Crystalline arthans, gaseous Verkath contained in their environmental suits, energy-based Zinteri flickering in their containment fields, and dozens of other species, all united by their dedication to scientific pursuit and their current state of agitation. "The verification results are conclusive," HFY announced, his exoskeleton shifting through shades of deep blue. "Dr. Chen's solution to the quantum consciousness problem is correct." The auditorium erupted in a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and electromagnetic pulses, the sounds of multiple species expressing disbelief simultaneously. A Verkath scientist floated forward, their environmental suit's translation matrix converting their gaseous vibrations into speech. "Impossible," the Verkath insisted. "We have applied every known computational model to this problem. Our quantum processors have run simulations for decades. How can a human, using primitive tools, arrive at a solution we missed?" Sarah stood up, her voice calm but firm. "Because you're all thinking like computers." She walked to the central platform, her footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet auditorium. May I? Anxvol nodded, stepping aside. Sarah pulled up the holographic display of her solution. Then beside it, projected the traditional galactic approach. The contrast was stark. Their method was a maze of complex calculations, while hers was elegantly simple. "Look at your approach," she said, pointing to their equations. "You're trying to process every possible quantum state simultaneously. It's thorough, yes, but it's also fundamentally flawed. You're so focused on being comprehensive that you're missing the underlying pattern." A Zintari scientist flickered forward, their energy form pulsing with skepticism. "Patterns without comprehensive data are meaningless. They lead to incorrect conclusions." "Do they?" Sarah pulled out her notebook, holding it up. "How do humans catch a ball?" The question seemed to confuse the assembled scientists. Finally, an Arthan researcher spoke up. "You calculate the trajectory, accounting for velocity, air resistance, and gravitational forces, then position yourself accordingly." Sarah laughed. "No, we don't. We look at the ball and move. Our brains process the pattern instinctively. No calculations needed, and we catch the ball." "But that's just physical coordination," the Verkath objected. "We're discussing complex quantum mechanics." "Are we?" Sarah drew a simple diagram in her notebook. "Or are we discussing patterns? The universe works in patterns. You're all so enhanced, so connected, that you've lost the ability to see them. You process everything, but you understand nothing." The auditorium fell silent. Sarah continued, her voice softer now. "Humans aren't smarter than you. We're not better. We're just different. We evolved to see patterns because we had to. No neural enhancements, no quantum processors, just our brains, trying to make sense of a complex world." She flipped to a new page in her notebook. "Watch this." She began drawing, explaining as she went. "If consciousness is a quantum field, then observation isn't about processing every possible state. It's about understanding the relationship between observer and observed. Like catching a ball. You don't calculate, you feel." The holographic display updated in real time as she drew, her simple diagrams transforming into complex quantum models. The assembled scientists watched, their various sensor arrays and neural enhancements struggling to process what they were seeing. "This is why my solution works," Sarah explained. "Not because it's more accurate than yours, but because it approaches the problem from a fundamentally different perspective. You're trying to compute consciousness. I'm trying to understand it." A young Artham scientist in the back raised an appendage. "But how can we trust understanding without comprehensive computation?" "The same way you trust your own consciousness," Sarah replied. "Do you compute every neural signal before you think a thought? Every quantum state before you make a decision? Or do you simply think?" The question hung in the air like a suspended particle, neither observed nor unobserved. The assembled scientists began to murmur amongst themselves, their various communication methods creating a symphony of uncertainty. Director Anxvol stepped forward, his exoskeleton now a deep purple, a color Sarah had never seen before. "Dr. Chen, are you suggesting that our entire approach to scientific advancement is incomplete?" Sarah finished. "Not wrong, just incomplete. You've mastered the science of computation, but you've forgotten the art of intuition. Humans haven't. We can't compete with your processing power, but we can see patterns you miss. Together," she smiled. "Together, imagine what we could discover." The auditorium buzzed with a new energy. The Vorkath scientist who had objected earlier approached Sarah, their environmental suit humming thoughtfully. "This pattern recognition, could you teach it?" "No," Sarah said, then smiled at their obvious disappointment. "But I can show you how to rediscover it for yourself. Sometimes the most advanced thing you can do is learn to think simply again." As the implications of her words rippled through the assembly, Sarah opened her notebook to a fresh page. Above her, the holographic displays continued to dance with equations and models. But she didn't need them. She had her pencil, her paper, and a room full of the galaxy's greatest minds, finally ready to learn that sometimes the most powerful processor isn't a quantum computer, it's a mind free to imagine. The Institute's review chamber was designed to intimidate. Its circular walls rose 50 meters high, lined with observation platforms, where hundreds of scientists could watch proceedings through enhanced optical arrays. Today, every platform was filled, and the quantum data streams were broadcasting across the galaxy. At the chamber center, Sarah Chen sat alone at a simple desk, her notebook open before her. Across from her, the review board consisted of 5 of the most prestigious minds in galactic science. Chief Examiner Televic, a Zin Terry elder whose energy form pulsed with barely contained skepticism, led the proceedings. Dr. Chen. Telvic's translated voice resonated through the chamber. You claim your solution to the quantum consciousness problem is valid, yet you refuse to submit to a neural scan that would verify your methodology. Sarah looked up from her notebook, where she'd been absently sketching patterns. With respect, Examiner, a neural scan wouldn't help. Human thought processes don't work like your quantum algorithms. That is precisely our concern. This from Dr. Vax, a Verkath theoretical physicist whose environmental suit was decorated with the marks of 100 academic achievements. Without proper verification, your work cannot be validated according to Institute standards. Sarah closed her notebook and stood. May I approach the main display? After a moment's hesitation, Televic nodded. Sarah walked to the massive holographic projection at the chamber center. With a few gestures, she pulled up the historical database of galactic scientific breakthroughs. Look at this pattern, she said, manipulating the display to show a timeline of discoveries. Every major breakthrough in the last 1,000 years has followed the same methodology. Quantum computation, neural enhancement, synthetic logic matrices. You've created a system that can only recognize progress that follows its own rules. Those rules exist for a reason, Dr. Vax countered. They ensure accuracy, repeatability, verification. They ensure stagnation. Sarah interrupted, the chamber filled with murmurs of shock. You've become so reliant on enhancement and computation that you've forgotten how to make intuitive leaps. When was the last time anyone in this chamber had an original thought that wasn't processed through a quantum filter? The third examiner, an Arthon named Caxtel, leaned forward. You speak of intuition and pattern recognition, Dr. Chen, but these are imprecise tools. How can you justify their use in advanced theoretical physics? Sarah pulled out her notebook and held it up. This contains the solution to 3 problems your quantum computers declared unsolvable. I didn't use enhancement. I didn't use computational matrices. I used this. She tapped her temple. Human brains evolved to see patterns because our survival depended on it. We had to understand predator movements, weather patterns, social dynamics, all without any technological assistance. She turned to the display, bringing up her solution to the quantum consciousness problem. Look at the elegance of this answer. Your computers couldn't find it because they were looking for complexity. The truth is beautifully simple. Simple. The fourth examiner, a crystalline entity named Pure Thought Convergence, chimed with harmonic disapproval. You have violated 13 established principles of quantum mechanics. No, Sarah corrected. I've shown that those principles are incomplete. The universe doesn't care about our rules. It operates according to its own patterns. Humans are good at seeing those patterns precisely because we aren't enhanced. We have to rely on our natural ability to recognize order and chaos. The fifth examiner, a being of pure mathematical thought called abstract reasoning construct, pulsed with curiosity. You suggest that technological advancement has become a limitation rather than an asset. I'm suggesting that different types of intelligence have different strengths. Sarah returned to her desk, opening her notebook to a fresh page. Watch this. She began to draw, and as she did, the holographic display responded, translating her simple sketches into complex mathematical models. The chamber fell silent as they watched her work. Every mark I make is intuitive, based on pattern recognition and understanding. Your computers would take hours to calculate what I can see in seconds, not because I'm smarter, but because I'm not trying to calculate at all. I'm observing, understanding, connecting. Telvik's energy form flickered thoughtfully. But without computational verification, how can you be certain your observations are correct? Sarah smiled. The same way I know that you're all leaning forward right now, fascinated despite your skepticism. I can see the pattern of your interest in your postures, your energy fluctuations, your subtle movements. No computation needed, just understanding. She stood again, addressing not just the review board but the entire chamber. Humanity doesn't want to replace your methods. We want to complement them. Imagine combining your computational precision with our intuitive leaps. Think of the discoveries we could make together. The chamber erupted in discussion, thousands of enhanced minds processing this possibility. Sarah waited, watching the patterns of conversation flow through the crowd. Finally, abstract reasoning constructs spoke. Your arguments have a certain elegance, but they challenge the very foundation of how we conduct science. Good, Sarah said firmly, because those foundations need challenging. The universe is too vast, too complex for any single approach to uncover all its secrets. You've mastered the science of enhancement. Let us show you the power of natural pattern recognition. Telvik's energy form pulsed with decision. This review will require additional consideration. But Dr. Chen, you have certainly given us much to think about. As the chamber began to empty, Sarah noticed something remarkable. Several younger scientists were taking notes, not on quantum pads or neural interfaces, but on physical materials. They were learning to see patterns in their own way. The investigation had become more than a review of her methods. It had become the first step in bridging two fundamentally different approaches to understanding the universe. And as Sarah packed up her notebook, she couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs came not from computing the answer, but from simply seeing it clearly for the first time. The Institute's Grand Archive, a vast chamber housing the accumulated scientific knowledge of 1,000 civilizations, had never been so quiet. The usual hum of quantum processors and neural interfaces had been deliberately silenced. At Director Axfel's insistence, for the first time in centuries, the archive's enhanced scientists were attempting to observe without computation. Sarah Chen stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by the galaxy's most brilliant minds. Many looked uncomfortable, their neural enhancements temporarily disabled. Some of the energy-based beings flickered with uncertainty, but all watched intently as she held up a simple glass of water. "Tell me what you see," she said, "not what you calculate, what you see." The scientists shifted uneasily. Finally, a young Arthan named Ixel spoke up. "Without my quantum processing matrix, I see light bending through the liquid, dancing on the surface. It's beautiful." Sarah smiled. "That's your first original observation in years, isn't it? Not processed through enhancement, not filtered through computation. Just you, seeing." The revelation rippled through the chamber. More scientists began to speak up, sharing observations they made with their natural senses. Each comment sparked discussions, connections, insights that their quantum processors had never considered. Director Axfel's exoskeleton shifted to a deep green, a color of profound realization. "We've become so focused on processing information that we've forgotten how to perceive it. Dr. Chen, your methods, they're not just an alternative approach. They're a key to unlocking aspects of the universe our enhanced perceptions have been missing." Sarah set down the glass and opened her notebook. "Exactly. Look at this." She sketched a series of simple waves, which the archive's displays transformed into complex quantum models. "When I solved your consciousness problem, I wasn't calculating quantum states. I was looking for patterns. The same patterns that appear in water waves, in crystalline structures, in the flow of time itself." A Zintari scientist pulsed with sudden understanding. "The unified field equations, they're not just mathematical constructs, are they? They're patterns in the fabric of reality." Yes, Sarah's excitement was contagious. Your computational models are incredibly precise, but they're so focused on the details that they miss the larger picture. Humans aren't better at math. We're better at stepping back and seeing how everything connects. The archive's main display activated, showing Sarah's previous solutions alongside traditional galactic approaches. The contrast was striking. Where enhanced computation produced intricate webs of calculations, human intuition found elegant underlying patterns. A Vorkath researcher floated forward, their environmental suit humming with curiosity. But how do we bridge these approaches? We cannot simply abandon our technological advancement. We don't have to, Sarah replied. She pulled up a new display, showing a hybrid model she'd been developing. Look at this. When we combine enhanced computation with intuitive pattern recognition, we get something entirely new. Your precision gives structure to our insights. Our insights give direction to your calculations. The implications began to dawn on the assembled scientists. This wasn't just a new methodology. It was a fundamental shift in how the galaxy approached scientific discovery. There's more, Sarah continued, her voice filled with excitement. Those 3 unsolvable problems I tackled, they were only unsolvable because you were looking at them through a purely computational lens. When you add human pattern recognition, she flipped through her notebook, showing how each solution followed naturally from observed patterns in nature. The archive's displays came alive with new possibilities. Scientists began sharing insights they'd never considered before, seeing connections their enhanced minds had overlooked. The chamber filled with the energy of discovery, not the cold precision of computation, but the warm excitement of genuine understanding. Director Angstful stepped forward, his mandibles clicking rapidly. Dr. Chen, we need to implement these methods immediately. But how do we teach pattern recognition to minds that have relied on enhancement for generations? Sarah smiled, pulling out a fresh notebook and a handful of pencils. We start with the basics. First, everyone needs to learn to see again. Really see without filters or enhancements. Then, she handed out the supplies. We learn to draw what we see, not what we calculate. The sight was unprecedented. Energy beings, crystalline entities, and gaseous intelligences all attempting to hold pencils, to make marks on paper, to see the universe through unenhanced eyes. Some struggled, others found unexpected talent, but all were engaged in something revolutionary. They were learning to think like humans. This is just the beginning, Sarah said, watching as the galaxy's greatest minds rediscovered the joy of simple observation. When we fully combine human intuition with galactic technology, that's when we'll start making real breakthroughs. A young scientist raised an appendage. Dr. Chen, is this why humans advanced so quickly after joining the galactic community? Because you already knew how to see patterns? Partly, Sarah replied. But mostly it's because humans never stop looking for new ways to understand things. We're endlessly curious, constantly questioning, always seeking patterns, even in chaos. She gestured to the chamber around them. Your civilization mastered the science of enhancement. Now it's time to rediscover the art of understanding. As the session continued, news of the paradigm shift spread through quantum networks across the galaxy. The message was clear. A new era of scientific discovery was beginning, one that combined the best of human intuition with advanced galactic technology. And it all started with a simple notebook and the ability to see patterns in the chaos of the universe. 1 year after Sarah Chen's arrival at the Galactic Science Institute, the landscape of scientific research had transformed beyond recognition. The Institute's central atrium, once a sterile environment of pure computation, now buzzed with a different kind of energy. Holographic displays still danced with equations, but alongside them, researchers of all species gathered around traditional whiteboards and paper notebooks, combining enhanced calculation with intuitive insight. Sarah stood at a window overlooking the Institute's sprawling campus, her original coffee-stained messenger bag still at her side. Director Angstful approached, his exoskeleton shimmering with the pearlescent hue that had become common among Arthans who had embraced the hybrid approach to science. The results from the Beta Centauri research station just arrived, he said, mandibles clicking with excitement. Their team used your pattern recognition methods to solve the dark matter distribution problem. 3 centuries of computational analysis, solved in 6 weeks by researchers working with both natural and enhanced perception. Sarah smiled, watching a group of young scientists below. A Zentari energy being was teaching a crystalline entity how to sketch by manipulating light through its own structure. It was never about replacing technology, she said. It was about remembering how to see with our original senses, then combining that with advanced tools. The implications go far beyond science, HFY observed. The Galactic Council is discussing implementing hybrid thinking protocols in every field, from architecture to space exploration. Some are even suggesting that species considering neural enhancement should first master natural pattern recognition. Sarah opened her notebook to a fresh page, beginning a new sketch. That's the real breakthrough, isn't it? Not just solving specific problems, but fundamentally changing how different species approach understanding the universe. The Institute's quantum announcement system hummed to life, announcing the arrival of a new group of students, the first class of the newly established Human Intuitive Methods Department. Sarah watched as they entered the campus below, a diverse mix of species, none wearing the neural enhancement halos that had once been ubiquitous. They're calling it the Chen Revolution, HFY said, his antenna twitching with amusement. Though I notice you still haven't accepted the Institute's offer of a neural enhancement of your own. Would kind of defeat the purpose, wouldn't it? Sarah replied, adding detail to her sketch. Besides, I think better with a pencil in my hand. Speaking of which, she held up her notebook, showing a new pattern she'd been developing. Take a look at this. HFY's compound eyes shifted through multiple spectrum analyses before he caught himself and looked with his natural vision. The pattern was deceptively simple, a series of interconnected spirals that seemed to suggest movement through multiple dimensions. I'm not sure what I'm seeing, he admitted. That's because you're still trying to analyze it, Sarah said gently. Don't think about what it is. Think about what it reminds you of. The director stared at the pattern, deliberately suppressing his enhanced perception protocols. Slowly, his antennae began to wave in an unconscious rhythm. It's like the way light bends around a quantum singularity, but also like the growth pattern of crystal formations in zero gravity. Exactly. Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious. And if that pattern holds true at both quantum and cosmic scales, then we've been misunderstanding the fundamental nature of space-time curvature. HFY's exoskeleton shifted to brilliant gold, the color of pure scientific excitement. Quick, we need to. He paused, mandibles clicking in embarrassment as he realized he'd been about to suggest running it through the quantum processors. Sarah laughed. Now you're getting it, she said. Let's work it out the old-fashioned way first. See where the pattern leads us naturally. Then we can use the enhanced systems to verify and refine. As they began working, more scientists gathered around them, drawn by the familiar sight of Sarah Chen starting another revolutionary discussion. Some held tablets and neural interfaces, others carried notebooks and pencils, but all were ready to combine both approaches to understanding. In the years since her arrival, the Institute had documented more breakthroughs than in the previous decade. But the real achievement wasn't in the problems solved or the papers published. It was in the fundamental shift in how the galaxy's greatest minds approached the unknown. A young Verkath student floated near, their environmental suit decorated with hand-drawn patterns, a new fashion trend among the species. Dr. Chen, is it true that humans knew all along that this combination of intuition and technology was possible? Sarah looked up from her notebook, considering the question. We didn't know, she said finally. We just hoped. Humans have always been good at hoping, at looking into the unknown, and seeing not just what is, but what could be. That's our real gift to the galaxy. Not just pattern recognition, but the ability to imagine new patterns that don't exist yet. She turned back to her sketch, adding a few more lines that somehow made the whole pattern clearer. Around her, dozens of the galaxy's finest minds watched, their enhanced and natural perceptions working in harmony, ready to see where this new pattern might lead. In the end, Sarah said, her pencil moving with practiced confidence, "That's what science really is. Not just computation or intuition, but the perfect blend of both. The ability to see what is, calculate what could be, and imagine what should be." Above them, the Institute's vast array of quantum processors hummed in harmony with the scratch of pencils on paper, a new symphony of discovery that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. The age of hybrid science had begun, and with it, a new understanding of how to explore the greatest pattern of all, the universe itself.